Good evening. Holtorf Medical Group is happy to present All About the Gut Part 1 with Dr. Nancy Louise Evans. Tonight you will learn the important role digestion plays in your immune system. Dr. Nancy Louise Evans is the first naturopathic doctor to join Holtorf Medical Group and brings a holistic approach to our center. Our presentation will begin momentarily.
I'm reading about my gut. Let's read about our gut. Let's read about our gut. 70% of our immune system is found in our gut?
What? I'm getting the scoop on the poop.
3, 2, 1, we're live.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Nancy Evans. Welcome to Health Chat number 6, all about the gut. I'm going to talk to you about how the gut is like the center of a donut, a barbed wire fence, a sponge, and a garbage disposal. And I just want to remind you of why I'm giving you these health chats, is that my purpose is so that you can attain optimal health, so that you in turn can live out your purpose. Because when we're healthy, our body is a vehicle for living out our purpose. But when we're not healthy, our body is an obstacle and we're all focused on the body. We want to just be able to live through our body so we can live our purpose in full energy. Okay? So let's talk about the gut. In order to be healthy, you have to have healthy digestion. You have to have a healthy gut. And what is the gut? The gut is a slang term for the gastrointestinal tract, or GI. So gastro means stomach, and intestine in addition to that. So what we've got here is a long hollow tube right from our mouth down through the anus. So let's see how that looks. We have a mouth, we go down through this esophagus, then we hit the stomach, and the stomach is a little bit over on the left, kind of upper side of your upper quadrant of your abdomen. And then we have the small intestine, which is a windy S-like thin tube, and then down at the lower right hand quadrant we have, it turns into the large intestine, so it's larger because it's thicker, and we have the ascending, the transverse, the descending colon, and then out through the rectum and the anus, right? So it's essentially this long hollow tube. Now technically speaking, the gut is still outside of our body. That sounds confusing, right? So let's look at that. And I said it's like the center of the donut. So here we have a donut, and here's the center, right? So if you think about it, the center is still outside in the environment, right? The fleshy part is you. So here we have you, and here we have the world. So the world is out here and out here. So our digestive tract it's this long hollow tube. So everything that's in there, it's not getting inside. It's trying to get into this fleshy part of the donut, which is us, okay? So what is this all about? Now the gut lining is a protective barrier between us and the external environment. So let's stretch it out. So now we have this long hollow tube, and this is you, right, on either around the tube, and then this is the world trying to get in. So what is this about? What is this in this relationship between us and the world? Why do we need it, or can we live without it? How do we make energy? We unfortunately are not like plants. Plants can make energy just from absorbing the sun, and they can go through photosynthesis and they can make their energy so they can thrive or survive. We cannot. So we need to absorb our environment in the form of food. And that's how we make energy, and that's how we live. Now, so we've got two things going on. So we're ingesting food, and the food is going to get passed in through the gut. So behind the gut is our bloodstream. So that's where the nutrients get extracted, and then that's how we make our energy, and that's how we form new tissues, that's how we form brain cells, that's how we form muscle tissues, the whole thing. So that's how we live and survive on this healthy environment of extracting nutrients from the environment. But what else do we have going on here? We also have a barrier, so it's this energy exchange. We're trying to get energy from the world. The world is also trying to get energy from us, right? We're eating other species are trying to eat us. So we've also got this other role here, and this is the barbed wire fence now. So we don't want harmful things to come in, harmful organisms or harmful objects to get in. We only want food in here, right? And this is where we want things to pass through and not get absorbed. But it's a tricky line. So this is the whole role of the gut lining in this whole process. So the gut lining, this whole digestive process, we have a couple different roles. The first thing is to absorb food from our environment. So that's digestion and absorption. Okay. But we also, as I said, we don't want to let in harmful elements. So we're basically trying to protect ourselves from harmful elements in the environment. So that's what immunity is all about. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And then we also have detoxification. Detoxification actually takes place further beyond the gut in our bloodstream, but we'll talk, and it involves a little bit more the liver. But let's just talk about, tonight's topic is about the immunity. So, how do we protect ourselves? What are the things we need to protect ourselves from? The first thing would be solid objects, right? So that's why we have our skin is the other protective barrier between our skin and the environment, right? Things don't just pierce us. When I was a child, I swallowed a ring, and in the great wisdom of the late 50s, or I guess the 60s, my mother called a pediatrician, and she told him that I had swallowed a ring, and he told her to tell me to eat a cotton sandwich. Again, in the great wisdom of maternal instincts and do everything as the doctor says, I literally can still remember chewing on that cotton sandwich. So I want you also to know that you don't have to do everything the doctor says. Use your gut instincts, your intuition, and that not all of these processes that the doctor recommends are always right. We want to work in partnership with the intelligence, hopefully, of your medical practitioner and your own innate intelligence and wisdom that you have, right? We don't know what happened to the ring, by the way. It was never found to this day. We do know, right? Okay. So, so we're trying to protect ourselves from this, sort of sharp objects. Now, even though it is this exposed area, our gut is still on the outside, we have sort of hidden it. It's kind of nice. It's in this internal environment, even though it is exposed to the external environment. So we really just, close our mouth and we have it wrapped around inside sort of the flesh of the donut or inside of us. So that's how we protect against, objects, hard objects that we wouldn't want to absorb. What are the other things that we don't want to absorb? Pathogens, right? So we have viruses, bacteria, we have fungi, so Candida, things like that, and we also have parasites. So those things we'll talk about. Those are all the pathogens or the other organisms. They're trying to use us as food to survive and use us as energy. And there's some really interesting research that it's not so much that we are using plants for energy, but they're actually manipulating us in the environment. If you want to read Poland's book about that, there's some really interesting material about this interrelationship between us and the environment. And then what's the third thing that we don't want in here? Are toxins. So we have chemicals, heavy metals. We have chemicals. There's so many now. There's some great studies showing that everybody has dozens and dozens of toxic chemicals inside of us. It's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of how many, how much, and if we're able to hopefully form as good of a barrier as we can, and then also detoxify, which we'll talk about later, to rid them out through our immune system. So these are the main enemies that we are trying to protect from. And how do we do it? So the first thing is that barrier that I talked about. So it's literally forming, having a closed mouth and having our digestive tract sort of hidden. And then the other thing is along this wall, we have really tight cellular junctions. So this is a really tight control. Not just anything can pass through. It has to be absorbed into these micronutrients so they can pass through into the bloodstream. So that's our first technique, is through barrier, not allowing any foreign objects in so that we can thrive. And then the next thing we do is we secrete immune cells. So in our saliva, for example, we secrete salivary IgA, secretory IgA. It's an immune cell, so it literally knows how to attack enemies. So it can just kill a virus, it can just kill things right on contact. There's some anecdotal evidence that perhaps the reason for kissing is to swap saliva, and that we're actually attaining more immune cells from our lover. So there you go. I just sort of no more romance, right? It's all about practicality. It's all about survival. If you really watch, so many of our instincts are really just survival. So we have in the cells, in the secretions that we make along the whole gut lining from our mouth all the way down, we have these things to repel and to kill organisms right there. So think about our military. We have all these different types. We have the Navy, we have military, we have all sorts of different types of, foreign agents, all these things that act in different ways, basically to protect our environment so that then we can thrive. The other thing we do is we secrete enzymes. Now, enzymes are mainly for breaking down food so that we can bring those smaller nutrients into the bloodstream, but they also work in a certain acidic environment, and we also secrete acid, especially the stomach. The stomach is full of acid. We want it to be acid, acidic environment. We don't want to be taking PPIs. We don't want to take any of these anti-acid formulas, because then we can't digest our food. And also, certain bacteria don't survive under these certain pH levels. So we have a lot of different techniques here, this barbed wire fence, to use our immune system to keep enemies away so that we can then absorb what we need. The final thing, and this is the most interesting, the most important, is that when we are born, we actually have no bacteria in us. But as soon as we're born, we're flooded with bacteria. And we actually colonize bacteria all the way through the digestive tract. So there are more them than us inside our GI tract. So this whole new kind of emphasis on sanitation and sterilization, first of all, it's completely futile. We cannot sanitize everything around us. And second of all, we would not be able to survive if we could kill off all this bacteria. So these are our pets that we've recruited, or it's a sort of foreign army that we've recruited to live here. Again, there's a possibility that the army actually recruited us, but that's a little bit hard to comprehend. But so we have these bacteria living on the surface of our gut, and it will kill other bacteria and keep us safe. So this is what we want to really control. It's a whole environment in itself. Think of it sort of like a swampy environment where there's a certain equilibrium, and if things get thrown off, you have algae growing or you have other disease-forming things happen. So that's what we're working on here, and this is what we're going to talk about, is this whole microbiome, really it's called. So what are some conditions that can happen here? The typical ones, the first one, of course, is some kind of diarrhea or vomiting. Now this is actually your immune system working really well. It spots a virus or bacteria, for example, in hepatitis A, or in just your basic stomach flu, we call it, right? Stomach flu or food poisoning. The immune system see the enemy, and they mount a big offense against it. And we usually we're basically just trying to rid the organism out of our body as fast as we can. So if you do vomit, if you have diarrhea, it's a good thing. You want to get rid of it. Be careful about using things like Pepto-Bismol afterwards, because you may not have gotten rid of the offending organism. You want to make sure it's completely out. However, we have to watch, because most of these are not that dangerous, right? You feel bad for about 24 hours. You can tell it's out of your system. You may have a slight fever, but usually you get through it fine. What we want to watch for is some really dangerous ones like cholera, and that's where you have extreme dehydration afterwards. So you want to make sure you rehydrate afterwards, and they'll often give something like Pedialyte to get your electrolytes back in as well. So that's the immune system working fast. That's the acute, sort of the innate form of our immune system. So that's pretty easy to detect. Of course, if anything goes on for more than a few days, you should obviously call your doctor and see if there's something more pathogenic that has taken place. So then the other thing is a little bit more gas and bloating, right? This is very, very common. So let's look at, and constipation actually. So the other one was this rapid immune response. By the way, with peristalsis too. So these are these muscular actions that push things through, again, especially if it's an offending organism, or we reverse it through vomiting. So if we have constipation or this sluggish digestion, first of all, it could be thyroid. It's a very common symptom of hypothyroidism, because thyroid works on these muscular contractions, and it means that all our muscular actions and reflexes are working slowly. So constipation is a very common symptom of hypothyroidism. If that's your only symptom, go ahead and get a blood panel done of your thyroid and get that checked out. The other thing that's quite common for this kind of gas and bloating and constipation is Candida. So we've got these hundreds and hundreds, billions really, of bacteria growing here. We also have some fungus growing here. It is Candida, so it does grow naturally here, but we just don't want it in too high of a ratio. And what happens when our bacteria decreases and the Candida grows? What are the symptoms? Mainly the yeast, it forms these other toxins, it ferments. So think about what happens when we ferment. There are a lot of bubbles, right? Think about making beer. So this is a whole beer making factory in here, and you get all this bloating. And it also slows things down. So that can cause a lot of symptoms here. And what do we do for Candida? So most of these symptoms are just in the GI tract, right? Again, this is in the border. It hasn't reached inside of us yet. But if it does pass inside the bloodstream, then we get these systemic issues, and this can cause fatigue, brain fog, joint pain is a real common one, and all sorts of pain in the body. And that's when the Candida has overgrown here, and then it's passed into the bloodstream. So we don't want that to happen. You can have that test done with a blood test. It's not completely accurate. We can often look at you symptomatically. So symptoms of that, if the Candida has gone systemic, is usually skin rashes. If you're a woman, you might get a lot of vaginal yeast infections, but it's often the skin rashes and the achiness as well as the constipation. The tongue can be quite coated too. We see that in severe immune deficiency where the tongue is quite coated and you have thrush growing there. So how do we treat Candida? The first thing we want to do is kill it. So if we want to, there's a whole range of treatments we can do, but the strongest treatment is diflucan or fluconazole. So it's antifungal. It'll kill the fungus, the Candida here. It also gets into the bloodstream. So if you're having those systemic issues, it will kill that as well. It's a fairly harsh medication, but it's often necessary. As a naturopathic doctor, I like to do as natural of treatments as possible, but in the case of severe Candida, I want to kill it as fast as I can and then use the naturopathic treatments to prevent and to move you forward in the future. But let's get rid of the acute symptoms as soon as we can. Fluconazole, some people feel fine on it. It can change the metabolism of your hormones, so some people just feel not great on it. Candida can cause a lot of the sugar cravings because yeast thrives on sugar. So feeding your body a lot of the sugar is like raising these pet yeast, and they are just growing, and then you get these cravings, and you can literally, these are these, especially women, we hear people saying, I just can't control it, and it's a little bit like these monsters inside are eating the sugar. So that is another indication of possible Candida. So we want to kill it with, we can use diflucan. The other one we can use, it looks like it's just gas and bloating, doesn't look like you have a lot of the systemic effects, then we'll use nystatin. Nystatin does the same thing. It kills the yeast, but it does not get absorbed into your body in the bloodstream. So it just wipes out the yeast through your GI tract. Now, when does this happen? This happens a lot of times when we're on antibiotics. So anti against bio is life. So, and this is this biome, right? This is bacteria. So it kills bacteria. It kills the bad bacteria in the case of an infection, but it also kills the good bacteria. So when we don't have our good army of bacteria controlling things, then the yeast overgrows. So you should hear this from your doctor whenever you go on an antibiotic. The least you should do is take a probiotic, at least eat some kind of a healthy yogurt, and will probably, if you're on it long term, put you on nystatin, maybe even fluconazole. So that's that kind of short term treatment. Long term, we want to re-inoculate you with good bacteria. So we can give you supplements. Usually when you've got this going, you're going to need some extra supplementation. You're going to need some probiotics. We have, you can usually do a pill form. There are dozens of kinds. There's ones that are high strength in one strain of bacteria, and there are other ones that are broad spectrum. So you can use either of those and they work fine, just depending on how we want to dose it with you. And then we have a super high dose in the case if we've given you something like diflucan, then we want to really overpopulate and really increase our own natural bacteria. So we want to kill the yeast, and then we want to repopulate and kind of change that environment, and then we also want to stop feeding it. So you've got to stop sugar. The good thing about diflucan, nystatin, not quite as much, but with diflucan or fluconazole, it's the same thing, is that cravings stop. You have kind of a metallic taste in your mouth, and it really can help shift you out of the craving, binging, sugar mode when you're trying to heal through this. So that's the deal with Candida. Another, all of this, by the way, these all come under this category of dysbiosis. Dys just meaning, off or negative, and then bio, so it means this biome, microbiome, the environment is out of balance. So Sibo, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, is a little bit different. So the colon is where all the bacteria is. We have billions in here. The small intestine is not so much. The small intestine is where we want to do all of our digestion and absorption. There's not quite as much bacteria there. But if we've eaten wrong and we have some different digestive issues going on, we get all this extra bacteria in the small intestine. So, and that is the same thing. It ferments. And also bacteria, when they're out of balance, they secrete their own toxins. These can be measured. There are a whole bunch of different tests you can do. You can measure the toxins that the bacteria are actually putting out. This is the person, if you've taken probiotics and you feel worse. Some people say, they have digestive upset, they take some probiotics, it feels really good, they feel like they've reestablished the flora in their digestive tract. For the person with Sibo, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, you give them more bacteria, even if it's the good one, the one that we should thrive on, and it just overflows. So it's this, and this is the kind of gas and bloating that's a little bit in the upper quadrant of your belly. So this one, again, we should be able to do most things with diet, but if it's pretty extreme, sometimes I like to hit it a little bit harder and then repopulate and get your lifestyle management to do the rest. So what we can do there, oddly enough, is take an antibiotic. There's one antibiotic that I like that's like the nystatin for the antifungal. It wipes out bacteria in your gut, but it doesn't get absorbed systemically. So you'll have no other symptoms. People say, when I get headaches when I take antibiotics, or whatever they might get. There are no other systemic effects. So I'll usually give it for anywhere between 3 and 10 days. So it's going to wipe out the bacteria in your gut. Yes, it's also going to wipe out your good bacteria. So again, it's a little bit like cleaning up the swamp, and we're going to then repopulate it. So we're cleaning up the fish tank, and then we're going to repopulate it with the right balance. So that's called rifaximin or Xifaxan, just remember the X. It's not usually covered by insurance, it's not cheap, but it's a good way to go occasionally. So we wipe out that good bacteria and the bad bacteria, and then we have to repopulate it. So that's when we really need a high dose probiotic afterwards, and it'll settle up this whole gut microbiome. The other thing I like to give is a powder. We carry one. There's different ones. Ours is called Gut Feeling Max, and it has anti-inflammatory herbs, so it's calming down any irritation here, because the lining of the gut can get irritated, just as your skin can get irritated if it gets infected. And it has anti-inflammatory herbs, and it has glutamine, which is an amino acid, and that's the preferred food of the intestinal cells. So it feeds them and nourishes them. And it has a little bit of protein in it too, so you can turn it into a shake, could make a protein drink. So that's Sibo, and those treatments can be used for various things. The next are viruses and bacteria. So when you study microbiology or virology, when you're studying viruses and bacteria, we always learn what the mode of transition is. So some viruses, right, just the common cold and the flu, is a respiratory virus. They're not airborne. They're not just completely floating around in the air. They live in respiratory droplets, right, some air, water that comes from our nostrils. And that's how it lands on other people, and then we inhale that. So those are respiratory viruses. Gastroviruses, or the ones that cause anything from stomach flu, then these are transmitted via food, right? Like hepatitis A, if you eat in a restaurant that has been, that's unclean, or if you eat some spoiled chicken, salmonella, E. coli. So these are these viruses and bacteria that can be quite harmful on the digestive tract, and some of them will then tear open the digestive tract and pass into and give us systemic effects. So this is the real study of microbiology and virology, is that learning how viruses and bacteria are and the science is really good at this. We always know how things are transmitted and how you can get them. So, and same, then we have sexually transmitted ones, or we have ones that can only be passed through the blood, like with HIV or with hepatitis C, things like that. So what do we do if we do get some kind of bug here, virus, bacteria? We may have to use a strong antiviral drug. We may have to use a strong antibacterial drug. So these things are, and then it may have passed into the digestive tract. I'm not going to go into all these lists, but so these are when we do need some some stronger guns to attack these kinds of things. The other thing I really like are essential oils. We have a couple. We have Virunex and Immunostim, and both of these are really wonderful antiviral and immune supporting supplements. They will heal the digestive tract nicely, and they're also good they do get absorbed in the bloodstream, so they're helping support the immune system, again, to attack viruses and bacteria. So remember, this is just a border. We're trying to keep bacteria and viruses at bay so they don't get absorbed in and then cause systemic effects. Obviously, we want to keep for thriving. Some other conditions are diarrhea, obviously. So diarrhea is usually, as I talked about, this acute gastroenteritis, but we also going to have parasites. Parasites are also microorganisms. They're often larger. Usually we get them traveling. You can get Giardia, for example, swimming in lakes that's growing in the water there. There's all sorts of ones, and they are systemic. So we want to make sure, but they're transmitted through the digestive tract. So this is their mode of entry, and we want to make sure that we kill those off. And then we also have worms too, so helminths, and so you want to do some pretty strong medications to get rid of these. A lot of essential oils, a lot of herbal treatments that can also be good. Again, I like to get rid of these things quickly if we have diagnosed them. They're not easy to diagnose. There's some good companies that you'll do stool samples. It's, we want to make sure that in that stool sample, did the offending organism come out? It doesn't always show up in the sample you give, but there's some pretty good companies that show what the offending organism is, what is the balance of your bacteria and even some of these secretory enzymes. It has some really nice balances so you can get kind of this full picture of your gut. I don't always use these because I'd rather have you spend the money on treatment sometimes than diagnosis if the diagnosis is not perfect. Sometimes we just want to try a few things and then we can get you well that way. Let's talk next about food allergies. So, food allergies and sensitivities. There's two kinds of allergies. One is called IgE and IgG. This Ig is the immunoglobulins. There's the proteins we make to be able to make antibodies against foreign pathogens. So an IgE is an immediate sensitivity reaction. So you eat shellfish and you go into anaphylactic shock, or you've had strawberries and your lips swell, or you get hives after you eat something. So most of these allergies we don't have to test for. You've had this experience, you know that that's what happens to you. So those are not usually the ones that are causing any typical symptoms for your life right now. And most people, if they have a severe allergy, they carry an EpiPen with them, and they know how to get the main treatment is avoidance of the allergen. IgG is a slower immune response. This is trickier. This is harder to pinpoint. So if you have an IgG response to a food, you have a food sensitivity basically. It means it could show up anything from feeling a little bloated 20 minutes later after you've eaten whatever you've eaten, or it could mean that an hour later you feel sleepy, or it could be that that evening you get a headache, or 4 days later you get a cough or a skin rash or acne. So these are hard to trace because somebody says, oh, I woke up this morning and I got, a big outbreak of acne, but I had a salad last night for dinner. It couldn't be a food allergy. Or, gosh, I'm so sleepy. I don't know, maybe it's my thyroid medication. So a lot of these things, because it's a slower reaction, and since they're systemic, it takes a while for that immune system, or really the effect of that immune system to travel to that organ, whether it's the tissue or the lungs or, the heart or something like that. So, how do we trace this? One is you could do an elimination diet, eat a very, very clean, restricted diet, and then slowly introduce the food one at a time. That's one way to do it. It's hard to do. It's hard to kind of stay motivated, but it's, some people go to fasting retreats and start that way. They feel so great when they've really eliminated any sort of processed food, and then they slowly get to learn what foods help them. The other way to do it is through a blood panel, and we have a nice kit that I like. It's by US Biotech. There's about 3 or 4 good companies, and it's a finger prick. You don't have to take a full vial of blood, and it tests for 96 foods. And there's a little bit of a range, and the most common food, the sensitivities that we see are wheat, including it might be the gluten, it might be the gliadin, but it is the wheat. It's sometimes soy. Dairy is a big one. Eggs are a big one. Some kind of nuts as well. So, and cheeses along with that whole dairy. So these are the most common ones. What are some typical symptoms? With dairy, we usually see gas and bloating. Sometimes I'll see acne. And also sinus issues, that congestion, coughing. You can kind of hear it in people's voice if they sound a lot congested. They drink milk or they eat a lot of pizza, or somebody wakes up in the morning coughing. They probably had pizza the night before. So that's a typical dairy sensitivity. Eggs is an interesting one. It's often some kind of constipation, bloating. It's often acne. That's a very interesting one. I've had a lot of people when they stop eggs that their acne clears up. Wheat, I'll talk about obviously more about the whole gluten picture, but wheat usually can cause some kind of achiness, fatigue, brain fog, gas and bloat. If you've read the book Wheat Belly, that's a good resource to talk about that. Corn is another one, often skin rashes from that. So these are the common ones. We can do a food allergy panel with you, and especially when you've gotten pretty clean with your diet and you still have some symptoms that just won't go away. I had a woman in her 40s, lifelong acne. She, took Retin-A and did all of those, pretty heavy duty. She had pretty much was quite embarrassed throughout her 20s especially. And we did a food allergy panel on her, and she had a lot. She did have gluten as well as dairy and eggs. She stopped all of those, and her acne cleared up in her mid-40s, and she just thought, gosh, if I'd known this in my 20s, it would have made such a big difference, especially for women. And acne is a pretty, rough issue to deal with. Her skin looks gorgeous now. So a lot of these can be these kind of hidden symptoms that you think, oh, it's just me. I've always had achy joints, or I'm a little brain fog, or I'm a little tired. It might be that you have a food sensitivity. So what's the deal with gluten? It's a long story, right? So gluten it's a large protein that's in wheat, and we're really not meant to digest it that well. And what it does too here is that it kind of tears away at the gut. So it causes symptoms in itself, and then it opens up the gut here, and it gets into the bloodstream. The good thing is if we have toxins, right? So we're trying to keep out toxins. But if they do pass in, then we're going to have the immune cells. So we do have immune cells here too. But then that's a systemic effect. That's where you can get so systemic are the things like the joint pain, the brain fog, fatigue, things like that. So gluten can literally irritate the intestinal lining. And these junctions, and then the toxins get all the way through. So now your immune system sees this large molecule, the gluten. By the way, the wheat in this country, people seem to have more of a reaction to. I have plenty of people who don't eat much wheat here, then they go, or because they don't feel well on it. They go to Italy, they eat pasta, or they have baguettes and friends, and they don't hybridized as it is here. So they've done all these kind of genetically modified organisms that has a lot more gluten in it. So again, it's this large molecule that we really are not meant to digest. So the immune system sees the gluten now in the bloodstream and says, well, that's an enemy, so it mounts an attack against it, which is great, right? So it rids the body of that, but if you continually eat wheat, you've got all this inflammation going on. So inflammation is good, by the way. It's like the fire trucks putting out the fire. But you don't want fire trucks on your street all day long, hosing down the houses, and you don't want to always have this constant immune attack. You want to have a healthy environment. So what's interesting about gluten is that your immune system attacks it. There's some proteins sticking out of the gluten that look the same as some proteins in our thyroid hormone. And so the immune system says, there's gluten, let's attack it. And then it turns over here and it sees the thyroid hormone, and there's the same protein sticking out and says, oh, there it is again, and it attacks it. So this is we don't know if it's completely causative, but it might be a correlation with Hashimoto's and Graves' disease, so that autoimmune thyroid disorder. So it's because we've mounted this immune response that we don't want to have in there. So we've got this hyperimmune response, and it's sort of turning around and attacking everything in sight. And I have seen antibodies with thyroid disorder come down when they do remove gluten. I haven't seen it completely correct in many people. I've seen it come down pretty close to normal, but most people have a hard time eliminating it entirely. But I do encourage it if they've got autoimmune thyroiditis. So some of the other things that go along here too is these bacteria. So they the bacteria themselves secrete toxins, and then toxins get into the bloodstream. So these are new poisons. So here's the relationship between our gut and our brain. So some people that are doing some really nice work around this is, the wheat belly, that's not talking so much about the brain, but Grain Brain by Dr. Perlmutter. He's on public TV, and there's some great books, and he has tapes. So he's talking about that these toxins get into the bloodstream, and then what do? They attack the brain, and they also shrink the brain. There's all sorts of things going on here. So this is what this gut-brain connection is. It's basically that we have a faulty border here, increasing, we're causing more toxicity, and it's leaching into the bloodstream. Another thing that happens here is that we have these villi basically these kind of finger-like projections along the gut, and it's so that we can extend out that surface so that we can absorb our food. And what happens with gluten is that it blunts these surfaces, and so it basically cuts them off, and so now you can't absorb your nutrients as well either. What also happens when you've got this whole imbalance with the bacteria is the bacteria secretes its own sort of mucus along here too. It's trying to protect itself. And then the enzymes we have, remember how we have these enzymes that are trying to break down your food? The enzymes can't get into the food. So then we have malabsorption. So one of the main ones we see with gut disorders is B12 deficiency, because B12 is absorbed right here between the small intestine, right here in the ileum before it goes into the ascending colon. And if we've got all this bacterial overgrowth, we can't absorb our B12. It also has to do with acidity in the stomach. So all of these conditions, we can have really failure to thrive, right? We're not getting in our nutrients from the environment, and then we're creating this sort of toxic sludge here, and then it might even be getting into the bloodstream. A really great book to read is called Breaking the Vicious Cycle by Elaine Gottschall, and she talks about this whole history of celiac disease. Initially, it was actually not referring to gluten. It was referring to these children who had this massive diarrhea and malabsorption. And the diet actually that cleans that up is reducing all carbohydrates, all grains. And so it's not necessarily the gluten. We think the gluten is just compounding it, and it's just sort of like that last sword that's really screwing up the environment. So what's going on here are these disaccharides. So when we eat sugars, especially even grain, even if we supposedly healthy grains, we have to break them down, which is good. Same like proteins, we break them down, amino acids. We break them down, but if we don't break them down well, they form these toxic substances, and they hang around here. They feed the wrong bacteria. So most of our gut issues are caused from carbohydrates. People say, oh, I can't absorb protein. It's usually very, very rare. I mean, they've shown it in these kids who have complete malabsorption, failure to thrive, meaning they're not growing, they're not absorbing any nutrients. They do fine with protein, and they do fine with fats. It's always the carbohydrates. So we even have them not do too many, they can't do any raw vegetables, not a lot of fruits, definitely absolutely no grains. So it really is that, because that's what's forming these toxins on this border. So what's the deal with leaky gut? I kind of alluded to it. So often it's gluten or it's these sugars. So leaky gut, it's such a strange, it sounds kind of embarrassing, right? But it's really, it doesn't have anything to do with what's happening in the toilet. It's happening here along the track. So rather than having these tight gap junctions, we're getting these toxins passing through. So our gut is leaky. It's not taking in just the small molecules, it's allowing these large molecules to get in. And then the immune system says, now I have to do this immune response to it. So that's the connection between leaky gut and all these other issues. Perhaps it's a direct link to this autoimmunity, because we've just blown the border here, basically. And then the whole immune system inside of us just doesn't know what to do. So then it starts attacking itself. So what do we do with this? The main thing, of course, is diet, which we'll do. We might have to do some medications to wipe out viruses or bacteria or yeast, and then we really have to heal this tissue. And we also want to slow down this immune response. And there's some really nice medications and herbs that we like here. As I told you about that gut feeling max powder, it's great for healing the tract here, and it's great for feeding and healing. As I said, we want these villi to grow again. We have oral gamma globulin. So gamma globulin, that's these these proteins. We have an oral supplement, so it's helping to support that immune response. It works really nicely with some GI problems. We also have ketotyphin. It is a prescription, it's compounded. It works really well of shifting this immune response, shifting that reactivity. We have Regenipep, and we have colostrum and transfer factors, which I will talk about in a moment. So that, just to kind of go back with the autoimmune, so we talked a little bit about Hashimoto's and a correlation between gluten perhaps. Some of these really, really dangerous autoimmune issues are Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And it is probably related, it has a genetic predisposition, and it also has to do with this alteration of this whole gut border. So let's talk about how to strengthen our immunity. The most important thing you can do is be born through a vaginal delivery. So most of us who are, midlife, we probably were. They weren't doing a lot of C-sections back then. If you're in your 20s and you're considering a C-section because you want to be able to go play tennis on a certain day, don't do it. So let's support the health of your baby, because when they go through the vaginal tract, they actually pick up all sorts of this healthy bacteria. So that's one thing you could do. Hopefully it's something you already did when you made a good decision about that when you were born. The other thing is to be breastfed. So now many of us middle life were not breastfed. That was just when it was not becoming in fashion, and we were exporting formula and telling mothers not to breastfeed because it sort of wasn't clean. But again, we're not giving that great immunity to the newborn. And we sort of talk about having kids eat dirt too. That's when they do pick up their immune system early on. So let's talk about, that aside, we'll do our best now with the genetics and with the past that we have. Let's talk about dietary recommendations. So really healthy proteins. We need a lot of protein for our immune system, so don't be afraid about getting protein in. All these immunoglobulins are proteins. Our bones, our tendons, our muscles, those are all, the tissue is made of proteins. You want to eat a good amount of protein. And then we want to have healthy fats. So again, we can have sort of these toxins in all these additive products that we have now, right? We have all these trans fats that can just wreak havoc here. So we want to have healthy fats, and they actually get absorbed really nicely through the digestive tract. They get absorbed just nicely right into the bloodstream. And all the green leafy vegetables produce the right amount of anti-inflammatory molecules and substances, as well as our nutrients. I'm not talking too much about nutrients right now. I'm sort of talking about the protective barriers so that we can absorb our nutrients. And then we can do probiotic and foods. So we can either take an oral supplement, but if you look in many native cultures, they had their natural probiotics. So fermented milks. Now, it's the fermented ones that many people can tolerate. The ones that are sort of formulated in our pasteurized milk is the one most people cannot tolerate because it hasn't recreated this healthy bacteria that we need. So kefir, watch out, there are a lot of new kefir on the market on these bottles, and if you read them, they basically have just a ton of sugar, and it is fermented, so you can taste a little bit almost like a weak almost champagne. It's just a little carbonated, a little fruity, and it has alcohol in it. So be careful, because it's just like drinking a soda. You can go right into a food coma, which I call when you have too much sugar and you just sort of pass out from that glycemic drop. We have sauerkraut in German culture. In Korean culture, we have kimchi. In East Indian, that spicy pickle. So all these have some good natural probiotics. If you want to learn how to make your own kefir, you can do that. Now, not everybody can tolerate dairy, so you have to kind of look and figure out if you can do that, or you can do the test. But if you make your own, either some kind of a yogurt or a culture of kefir, both of those can do it. So that's another way, is to get that, to kind of keep feeding this healthy bacteria. One kind of supplement called FOS, fructooligosaccharides, you've probably seen that it's sometimes an ingredient on probiotics. Theoretically, it's a good idea. It's it's food for the bacteria. And theoretically, it's kind of a good idea because you're going to feed your bacteria. I find that most people, when they take it, get gas from it. It just seems like it's feeding too much of the bad bacteria as well. But there are a couple foods that have it. Some fibers have a natural prebiotic in them as well. Jerusalem artichokes, some inulin, some flax has some prebiotics in there. You've got to get rid of the chemicals. So even synthetic sugars, that's a whole other story, but we're going to have a glycemic response just the same way we do with sugar. So you want to get that out of the way. And then toxins. So, aspartame is a neurotoxin. So it either just comes right in here, or it's a small molecule, it gets absorbed right in, it goes right to the brain, or it's just feeding this bacteria and causing a bad response here and causing the bacteria to produce their own toxins, and then we absorb those. So it's really important to, it's interesting when people think, well, does it matter what we eat? And it's not so much just our macro proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. It's these chemical responses that we have going on here. And it affects, there's some DNA response here, whether we produce immune cells, whether we secrete them, and everything that goes on there. Some great resources. So yeah, I talked about that. It's called Breaking the Vicious Cycle. She really talks a lot about basically eliminating carbohydrates. And I have somebody right now who has severe chronic fatigue syndrome, and he started on this diet on his own almost before coming to see me. Actually, he's getting so much more energy. Many of his symptoms are going away. So it wasn't so much that there was some big offending organism. It was just that he kept tearing up the gut and really being malnourished. Another source is the Weston A. Price Foundation, and they talk a lot about making broths. So when we make full bone broths, there are all these colloidal substances and minerals and fats that support our immune system. There's gelatin, there's collagen, there's some immune factors in there that actually also support our immune system. And then, when you read about paleo diets, they kind of come from this Weston A. Price Foundation. There's a great cookbook. If you look at Weston A. Price Foundation.org, I think you can read about really the science behind all these diets and the history behind them. Another good, just learning about the Mediterranean diet. Any native culture really has all these healthy, so look back at what your grandmother or your great-grandmother ate. Another really interesting person to study is Terry Wahls, W-A-H-L. She has multiple sclerosis and talks about how she knocks down the whole autoimmune response with diets and supplements, and then just did a really high-intensity dietary program. And again, it's having organ meats, not just the muscle meats that we eat, lots of vegetables, of course, and again, so these bone broths, and then minimizing all the grains and carbohydrates. That those are the main cause of all these sort of brain disorders as well. So I think we've done a pretty good primer on the immune system. So this is what we really have to protect if you want to be healthy. And if you're, even if you're getting a lot of seed because you have some food allergies, again, because you've just messed up the border, and then you can't tolerate anything that we should be able to tolerate in the environment. We should have these great acute responses to things, rid them out of the way, and then thrive. Next time we'll talk about digestion and absorption and detoxification. So please, we'll do that next month. If you have any questions, I can answer them on Facebook, so send those in. There's also a comment box down below. And I look forward to seeing you next time. We can also do consultations, especially like these kinds of things where you probably aren't going to need a prescription. We know I can't diagnose or treat you on the phone, but we can do some consultations and see if we can kind of get things going to support your immunity through your gut, okay? So you have to have a healthy gut if you want to be healthy. So take care, be well. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you for joining our live stream event, All About the Gut Part 1 with Dr. Nancy Louise Evans. We hope you found this information useful as you search for gut and immune health. Join us next month for Part 2, where you will learn about digestion and absorption. If you would like to schedule an appointment with Dr. Nancy Louise Evans, fill out the form below and one of our new patient coordinators will contact you. Have a great evening.